Hi, and welcome to the Lance Roberts Show podcast. I am so excited to have back my friend Nomi Prins. Of course, she is the author of the book Collusion, a must-read, particularly given today's environment, where we are with this shift in the political landscape, what's happening with the Fed, what's happening in the global economic landscape. We're going to talk a lot about this today, but if you want to find out more about Nomi, go to her website, Nomi Prins. That's NOMIPRINS.com, and basically get a book, get a copy of her book Collusion. It is a must-read. We interviewed Nomi before when she first released her book, went through a lot of those details. That interview is still on our website at realinvestmentadvice.com. But on today's edition of the Lance Roberts Show, we're going to talk with Nomi about what's happening right now. I mean, Nomi, we've got so many things that are going on to talk about, from the Federal Reserve and from Davos and what happened there to kind of this global economy that we're in. And we're seeing a lot of issues with the global economy, rising populism, really kind of around the globe. Let's we've had this big rally from the lows of December. And of course, last year, 2018, the markets kind of ran into a bit of a hiccup. Let's start with Davos. What happened? Of course, this is the annual gathering of all the billionaires around the world. They own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the world combined. And they gather every year to determine the future of the world economy as we know it. I mean, they know what's best for us, right?
Well, they think so. They just don't pay attention to what that actually is.
So what was your takeaway from what you heard coming out of Davos?
Well, first of all, the interesting thing about Davos this year is there was a lot of absences from some of the major world leaders because they were dealing with their own political issues back at home. For example, President Trump didn't show up, neither did any of the entourage of the administration, Treasury Secretary, and so forth. Theresa May did not show up from the UK. Macron didn't show up. So it was kind of interesting that you have this gathering of the most elite political and financial figures in the world, and the major absences are because some of those leaders, are sort of dealing with all the turbulence of their own countries, yet they're supposed to be getting together to figure out what's best for the world. In fact, the World Economic Forum, that is the one that sponsors Davos, has on their website that the whole point of them getting together is to figure out what's best for the world. And so it's just interesting about the chaos that goes on in the background of all the parties, and so the ski, glittering snow, and all of that there. And they didn't have a lot of statements coming out of it that were particularly relevant. Surprise, surprise. After that, they note that there's economic slowdown, but they don't really talk about what to do about that. So it was a very bizarre, almost more than usual detachment from the world, this particular Davos.
So Nomi, one of the interesting issues coming out of Davos was Ray Dalio, who runs the world's largest hedge fund. And he made some interesting comments about rising inequality in the world and, of course, the issues that is causing. And, of course, this is leading to this rise of populism that we're seeing around the world. But yet it seems that most of the leaders discount this rise in populism, that it's just kind of it's just a bunch of crazy people, that are just protesting for real. I don't really understand why they're protesting, but they don't really seem to understand what the issues that are weighing on a big chunk of the population is occurring, and why this is leading to this rise in populistic movements, not just in the U.S., but really around the world.
No, that's right. I mean, everywhere. And these populist movements, or sort of neo-populism, they swing people to officials that are trying to run for office on the left and the right. So what's interesting about this particular wave is it doesn't. The point of it is to go away from where people believe their politicians to be now, and to just go in whatever the direction is that is opposite from now. So in Mexico, for example, we've seen a lot of populist rhetoric swing to the current leader, who's on the left side of things. And in Brazil, we've seen it go to a right-wing leader who's on the right side of things. And all of that to mean, and not to fully labelize, is that on the ground, people are just simply not trusting their current elected leaders, wherever that is. And they're using the frustration that they have, I believe, with their own economic conditions, because normally that's where unrest comes from. It's either religious or it's economic, and for the most part in today's world, it's economic, and people not really feeling that they're empowered by their own countries and sort of their own ability to rise from a wealth or just financial security perspective in their own countries, and so that just creates the kind of anger and tension that then allows people to sort of pop up from different parts of the spectrum to say, no, we've got this, we'll figure it out. And what's interesting is even when they do, for example, the situation in France, Macron had said when he ran and he was elected that he would be able to sort of help people from a job perspective, from an economic perspective, and so forth. Didn't manage to do that. So all of a sudden there's all of these protests in the middle of Paris from people effectively just irritated by the lack of just leadership. And again, that same thing has happened throughout the world. We see that in the UK with Brexit. There was 2 years ago almost now a vote that people wanted to leave the UK and take it out of the European Union. There's still a lot of conversation about that. Current Prime Minister Theresa May has been all over the place in trying to get her own party as well as the other party, the Labour Party, to agree on how that would even look. So even when people vote a certain way because they believe that their government or related governments aren't helpful to them, the governments in power don't know what to do with it. So we have this rise in populism, which is basically another way of saying people are frustrated. This rise in sort of nationalistic leaders who say, well, if we just concentrate on ourselves, everything will be okay. And then a further disintegration of economic growth, because the reality is the world is pretty interconnected. And simply rhetorically talking about nationalism doesn't really promote economic growth. In fact, in today's world, it promotes economic uncertainty, which then gets you into the full cycle again. So we are in a multi-year cycle of the residue, ultimately, to segue this back to what happened 10 years ago, a financial crisis that led to a lot of money being dumped into the world that did not go into the real economy, that therefore frustrated people who are therefore acting out in terms of how they vote and allowing things to even go more in the direction of non-focus on economic growth and more focus on political rhetoric.
Wow. So you just covered about 15 topics.
Lots of things. I know. We can unpack it.
Well, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a break right there, and we're going to come back with Nomi Prins. Be sure and get her new book, Collusion. It's actually been out here for a bit, but go by Amazon. It's a must-read if you really want to understand what's happening around the world. And you can go by her website as well. And she writes a weekly piece for thedailyreckoning.com also. So go by her website, Nomi Prins, Nomiprins. And of course, you can get all of her latest writings. She writes all over the place. She's just one of my favorite authors ever. And again, when we come back from the break, Nomi, I want to pick up with this idea of, what happened after the financial crisis. We had central banks globally dump money into the system. You make an interesting statement. It didn't go where it was intended to go. And now it's led to these other consequences. So I want to pick up on that story there and move this to something that I've been writing a lot about lately, this whole idea of really this modern monetary theory and its impact to where we're headed, socially, politically, and economically. We'll come back with Nomi Prins right after the break. Don't go away.
Want a longer talk with Lance about your money? Request a personal one-on-one at realinvestmentadvice.com.